Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're going to tackle something absolutely crucial. We are fundamentally shifting how you approach one of the biggest hurdles in your academic journey, the engineering literature review. We're going to move completely away from that outdated, frankly exhausting habit of just listing paper summaries, and instead learn how to craft a structured, highly critical argument. If you've ever stared at a massive, overwhelming folder full of PDFs and thought, where do I even start? Well, you are definitely in the right place.
Okay, here's our learning roadmap for today's explainer. We've got 5 main stops. First, we'll look at the summary trap. Second, the structure of a review. Third, shifting to thematic writing. Fourth, building the perfect paragraph. And finally, identifying the research gap. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The Summary Trap, a Common Pitfall.
I want you to take a second and actually ask yourself, what exactly is a literature review? I think a lot of us just kind of assume it's a chronological list of downloaded PDFs. You know the drill. You read a paper, you write a paragraph about it, you read the next paper, you write the next paragraph. But here's the thing. Engineering decisions have to be based on evidence, right? Not just isolated opinions. A real literature review is a systematic examination and synthesis of published research. It is absolutely not just a summary.
Just look at the contrast here. The summary approach literally traps you into just listing facts. Paper A did X. Paper B did Y. Paper C did Z. If your draft reads like that, sequentially summarizing one thing after another, you're stuck in the summary trap. A true synthesis, on the other hand, does something entirely different. It compares approaches, it spots trends, and it exposes gaps. Think of it like a giant puzzle. A summary just hands you the individual pieces. But synthesis? Synthesis connects those ideas. It tells the reader, hey, while paper A used forced air circulation, paper B used thermal energy storage, and both improved efficiency, but wait, neither of them tested in high humidity. Do you see the difference there? You are actively comparing and connecting rather than isolating.
Section 2. Structure of a review. The macro perspective. So here is the logical 6-step progression of a rock-solid literature review. And spoiler alert, it's not just a random collection of thoughts. Every single section has a highly specific purpose to build one unified argument. It flows like a funnel. You start broad with the introduction, explaining why the bigger engineering problem even matters. Then you hit the search strategy. This makes your review reproducible by laying out your databases and keywords. The real meat is the thematic discussion and critical comparison. This is where you organize by concepts, not authors, weighing the strengths and limitations of different methods. Finally, all of that funnels down into the research gaps, which logically justify your future directions. It's a targeted, beautifully logical funnel.
Section 3. Shifting to thematic writing. The paradigm shift.
Okay, if you take nothing else away from this explainer, remember this concept: thematic synthesis. By definition, this means grouping research papers by shared technologies, methods, or problems rather than discussing them one author at a time. Your literature review needs to tell the story of the engineering field's evolution. It shouldn't read like some disjointed roll call of individual researchers. So as an example, instead of summarizing 5 papers sequentially, you'd group them by a single theme. Maybe something like computer vision approaches or sensor fusion techniques, and then you discuss how all those papers relate to that one specific technology.
A great way to actually pull this off is by using a comparison matrix. This is honestly a real game changer. By extracting your data into categories like study, method, strength, and limitation, before you even start writing, the themes basically reveal themselves. Imagine you're researching robotic vision. You fill out this matrix, and boom, you instantly see that CNN models give you high accuracy but need massive data sets, while YOLO models give you real-time detection but totally struggle with small objects. You aren't just passively reading anymore. You're actively categorizing and prepping to compare.
Section 4. Building the perfect paragraph, micro-level structure.
We're zooming in now. This right here is the anatomy of an analytical paragraph. And honestly, if you follow these 4 steps, it becomes literally impossible to just randomly drop facts into your paper. Step 1 is the topic sentence. That's where you introduce the engineering theme. Step 2 is evidence, bringing in multiple studies that explored this theme. Step 3 is the comparison, where you analyze how those approaches actually differ. And finally, step 4 is the limitation, where you expose the gaps in those approaches. It's just a beautifully structured sequence of logic. Let's look at how this builds out in a real, concrete example from robotic vision. While CNN models provide strong accuracy, YOLO approaches offer faster detection. However, both require large data sets. This is a perfect showcase of steps 3 and 4 in action. The synthesis seamlessly connects the strengths of 2 totally different models and then
bam, immediately pivots to a shared limitation. Notice what we didn't do here. We didn't say author A used CNN and author B used YOLO. We kept the focus entirely on the methods and their trade-offs.
Now, to make those paragraphs actually flow together, you need some connective tissue. Academic transition words are basically the secret weapon of great writing. Words like similarly show agreement. In contrast, or unlike previous studies, highlight critical differences in the methodology or the results. And then phrases like despite these advances or further investigation is required, these act as massive signposts for your reader. They signal, hey, I'm about to drop a limitation or a research gap right here. Use these to naturally guide your reader through the argument.
Section 5. Identifying the research gap. Climax of the review.
You know, a lot of students think a research gap just means literally nobody has ever studied this topic. But in engineering, that is almost never true. Real gaps emerge when you compare the limitations of multiple papers. Check out these specific sources for gaps. You've got technical gaps, maybe a model requires way too much computation power. You've got methodological gaps where, say, a paper relies entirely on a simulation instead of real-world testing. Then there are application gaps, like when a system is only tested in a super-controlled lab, not a dynamic industrial environment. And of course, data gaps, where the data sets used are just way too small. The point is, you find your research gap by actively looking for the flaws and blind spots in the existing research.
So let's see how all this culminates into the final product. Compare a notoriously weak, vague gap like saying, more research is needed. I mean, snooze, right? Compare that to a strong gap. Although deep learning models improved robotic object detection, most are evaluated in labs. Further research is required to validate systems in dynamic industrial environments. Wow, that is night and day. It acknowledges the existing knowledge, pinpoints the specific limitation, and explicitly states what future research has to do. It's totally evidence-based and sets up the future direction of the field perfectly.
All right, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a question to ask yourself the very next time you sit down to write. Look at your own draft and ask, are you just stacking bricks, like just dumping paper summaries one after another in a pile? Or are you actually building a house? Are you connecting those pieces with a logical structure, a thematic design, and critical synthesis to create something that actually matters? Because a true literature review builds a house. So go out there and start building. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.